Hey, this is Matthew, and welcome back to Nerd News today, and it's time for the beginning of a new series here on the channel, and that's us taking a look at some Japanese pro wrestling figures. So I've been a collector of Japanese figures for some time, and of course that began with my love of Japanese wrestling, which I got into probably the late 90s. I got into it via tape trading, so I learned about things like pancrase. Back then I was into garbage wrestling also, but my taste grew beyond that, and I eventually discovered awesome things from New Japan and All Japan of that era, and then eventually Pro Wrestling Noah, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So these videos are going to be one part history lesson explaining who they are, one part review, but to be fair, you're going to get a lot more history than you will review because there's not much to really talk about with these toys. So let's just jump right into our first ever figure on this series, and that's my #1 favorite Japanese wrestler of all time. You're looking at Kenta Kobashi. So Kabashi first debuted back in the late 80s. In fact, his first match was 1988. And he was working for All Japan at the time, after being trained by Dory Funk Jr., Giant Baba, and a few other notable wrestlers. And so, as part of his initial booking, he actually lost his first 63 matches. So, you know, we're talking the prototype here for Kurt Hawkins maybe a little bit. And the reason why he lost all of his first matches, which were all singles matches, it's because his booker, Giant Baba, who ran All Japan at the time, wanted him to be this kind of like underdog character that he always rooted for, that put on a heck of a performance and put his all into everything he did, but still came up short every time. And through doing that, fans fell in love with him even more because he had a pretty unique look. I mean, he's a very big, buff bodybuilder, and he never said die. No matter what would happen, he would keep fighting until the very end. So fans loved him, and that led him to rise in prominence more through All Japan, where he had great feuds with Mitsuharu Misawa, Toshiaki Kawada, so many other really, really big guys. You know, Kabashi is one of the 4 pillars of Japanese pro wrestling for a reason. But what we're going to talk about today is what this outfit is from, what this toy is from, and that's this Mogura House Charapro style figure from his look in Pro Wrestling Noah. So what is Pro Wrestling Noah? Well, what you guys need to know is that in the late 90s in particular, there was really 2 companies that ran everything in Japan for pro wrestling. And that was All Japan Pro Wrestling and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Essentially, you can imagine it like WWF versus WCW. Just the big difference was that there's one wrestler named Mitsuharu Misawa who one day just decided, hey, I don't like this anymore, I'm leaving. And in the mid-2000s, he basically left, along with pretty much almost the entire All Japan roster of like the best guys, and formed Noah, which was just like the most amazing thing ever, and brought us some of the greatest matches of Japanese pro wrestling history. And so among those gentlemen that came over was Kenta Kobashi. And this figure here represents, in fact, the earliest days of Pro Wrestling Noah, and their very first events, because this outfit is actually from the very first event that Noah ever held. So let's talk about this figure real quick before we go more into the history about him. So this packaging here is just rather plain. It's got a picture of Kobashi's face on this side, full body shot of him on this side, got his name in English and in Japanese characters. On the back, we have a very short bio, just kind of talking about him going into Noah, along with a few of his stats about himself, and just a nice little picture of him. And in terms of English, there's none on the back of this saying what year it came from, but based on the look here, this had to have been 2000 or 2001, most likely at the latest, because the very first Noah events were in 2000, and that's, again, as I said, what this is based on. So I'm going to go ahead and take him out of the packaging, and we'll talk about that a little bit here. So here's our Kobashi loose, and so this outfit, as I mentioned, is from an actual match or 2. It's actually only 2 matches, to be quite honest. And that's from Noah's first and second event. I believe it's the second event. So in Noah's debut event, Kabashi here was part of the main event, which was a tag match between himself and Juniakiyama versus Akira Taue and, of course, Mitsuharu Misawa, the mastermind behind Noah. And they had a heck of a match, which I believe saw Akiyama winning for his team. And then the next match they had the same outfit in was the following event, which was a singles match between Kenta Kobashi and Juniakiyama, which Akiyama won by actually submitting him with a guillotine choke. And I say submitting loosely because he actually choked him unconscious, and apparently it was for real. He had him in the King Crab lock, I believe it's called, and Kabashi just falls limp pretty much at that point. And the word is that was not a work, that was actually him passing out for real. And if you watch the match, you'll see at the end, it looks pretty darn real, like they're basically resuscitating him, and he looks pretty out of it. Part of that is because Kabashi was in a lot of pain during that time. He actually would leave Noah for a little bit to repair his knees because he had very badly damaged knees. He needed knee surgery, so he actually would leave more or less after that match to go get those fixed. He'd come back, he would need the surgery again, and he came back again. So, you know, he had a rough first few years in Noah just because of those knee injuries, really messing him up. But as for the figure, outfit-wise, I mean, yeah, this is totally the outfit that he wore, which was these bizarre-looking pants here, these bizarre-looking trunks, And I gotta tell you guys, this is actually like probably one of my least favorite Kobashi figures ever. It's one of my least favorite Kobashi looks, but yeah, as a figure itself, this is easily one of my least favorite Kobashis. So the main reason why is because I hated this outfit that he wore in Noah. I did not like any of this look. It was like they're trying to do that tribal look for him, but it just did not work. I never understood the boots. I mean, they look way better in real life, but I just never felt like it really matched Kobashi's personality because he mostly wore like solid orange trunks for the majority of his career. And then when he returned to Noah, he had mostly black gear with some similar kind of like purplish highlights in it. But it didn't look anywhere near as garish as this does, because this just really, it doesn't look that good in my opinion. Face sculpt wise, well, you know, the face sculpt is actually pretty decent, but he's got this really thick beard on him, and it's kind of funny because he didn't have that beard in either of those matches. He'd have a beard a little bit earlier in his career, maybe a year or two before he'd have this beard, but he didn't really have it for very long, and again, not with this outfit, so it's a little inaccurate. Unless someone out there can show me otherwise, from my research, from what I remember about Kenta, he didn't have that beard with these trunks, really ever. And just to kind of go a little bit deeper into his outfit, if you want to know exactly for sure what this outfit is, this is 100% really meant to be his debut in Noah, because when he had that match against Akiyama a little bit later on, he actually was wearing a white wrap around his elbow, one of his elbows, which he does not have here. So specifically, this is Noah Day 1 Kenta Kobashi. So these Charapro figures do not have a ton of articulation. All he really has is the arms that can go up and down, but look really not so great when he does, because you can see his shoulder joints kind of like popping out and bulging. And his waist should move, and it does. All right, and that's it. That's our articulation. So not much to talk about there. That's why the focus really is the likeness and everything else. So, yeah, I will say that despite the likeness not being one of my favorites, and especially not my favorite paint job of him, the body is absolutely him. They've got the barrel-chested body of Kabashi, the thick legs. You know, he was a real big buff guy. So I think they've totally captured that here very well. They captured the essence of Kobashi. It's just unfortunate that likeness is not one of my favorites, mostly because of that paint job. Now, there would be, of course, many other Kenta Kobashi figures, and they would be much better in my opinion, way more improved. You know, one of the things I don't like about this figure in particular is his arms here, because they're both closed fists, and that doesn't really read to me as much as Kabashi as it does just kind of like bland whatever, you know. And there would be other versions of Kabashi with, again, better paint jobs, different colored trunks, where he also would have a knife hand instead of a closed fist, because he was known for his knife hand chops, his machine gun chops that if you don't know what they look like, you better go learn about them right now. That was a way better look for him, and of course better outfit. And in addition to variants of him in his wrestling gear, he also had a few in his entrance gear. And that included a version of him with his robe. There's also a version of him with the GHC championship belt and the robe around his waist, with the belt around his waist to be specific. And there's also a version of him in a 2-pack with Timon Honda when he was the GHC tag team champions with him. And that figure, I believe, has just one belt around his waist. And so one of my first Japanese wrestling figures actually was that Kobashi with the 2 championship belts. It's one of my favorites, in fact, ever. I don't have it available with me today to show you guys, but if I can find a photo, I'll pop it in right now so you can see what I'm talking about and see how good it is. In addition to that, I believe Kabashi also had, I think he may have had a bronze variant or some similar kind of goofy variant like that. But he also had a very rare sepia version of himself with the GHC title, in fact. It's a really cool looking piece and extremely rare. So if you ever see one of those, totally jump on that, because if you don't, I will. So at the end of the day, you know, this Kabashi is not one of my favorites of him, but again, there are much better versions of him. But there are much better versions of him out there, and you know what? We're gonna look at all of them, or at least as many of them as I can get my hands on. But we're definitely gonna be looking at least 1 or 2 more of these guys, because, you know, Kabashi's my favorite, and he's had a lot of good figures from the Charapro style line. So I'm gonna give you guys now some homework also. If you wanna learn more about Kenta Kobashi because you don't know anything about him and you're sitting here watching this video and going like, who is this guy? Why should I care? I want you to go check out a few of his different matches. Now, if you wanna see the match from this outfit, that will be his match against Juniakiyama, or the tag team match I mentioned before. But I don't think those are the best representations of him. So I think my homework for this particular figure is going to be the earlier career of Kabashi and not so much the GHC stuff, because we're going to have more Noah figures of Kenta to talk about later on. So in terms of All Japan stuff, I really recommend his matches against Stan Hansen. I recommend any of his stuff against Dr. Death Steve Williams. In fact, that was one of my favorite matches of all time. That's also what got me interested in becoming a fan of Dr. Death. But really, if you're going to talk about Kenta Kobashi, you need to see his ongoing feud against Mitsuharu Misawa. So really, look at any of the matches he ever had against Misawa, and you'll see just like why this guy is magic and why those two just gel together so amazingly. So that's our look at this very first Kenta Kobashi figure in this very first episode of this new series here. And this is Kobashi in his Noah gear from day 1, first voyage, if you will. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you found it informative and hopefully somewhat entertaining. And more importantly, I hope that you'll stick around for more of these, because there's going to be plenty more where this came from. So please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you can get notified whenever we do all of our other videos here, which includes more Japanese pro wrestling toys, American pro wrestling toys, everything else that happens here on the channel. And until then, I'm Matthew. This has been Nerd News Today. Be safe and well, and keep that fighting spirit burning.